title of Conjuring Yeats. We're not really sure whether it's Conjuring Transitive Yeats or Conjuring Yeats as a kind of adjective. And I think we're going to have a little bit of both now. Starting off with Adam Piet. Adam's the chair of modern literature at the University of Sheffield. He's the author of 3 monographs, Remembering and the Sound of Words, Remembering and the Sound of Words, Mallarmé, Proust, Joyce, Beckett, Imagination of War, which is British fiction and poetry, 1939-45, and The Literary Cold War, 1945 to Vietnam. And he's also contributed to significant collections of essays, including the co-edited Edinburgh Companion to 20th century British and American war literature. You might have seen a theme there that he is an expert on war studies, poetry, modernist fiction, translation, and co-editor of international contemporary poetry journal Black Box Manifold. And he's going to be talking on mage, image, and imagination.
Excellent. Is this on there? Yes. Okay. Everyone hear me? Yeah. Okay. I was just talking about the fact that everyone is great to be here in Brazil. I used to live here as a kid in Rio, and I was just sort of going around like a kid. So if I stop and start crying or something, give me a sweet or something. But anyway, I was thinking about the image and imagination are obviously contact words, and sort of bringing it in to the magus figure and the idea of magic, just because of the sound of the words. Yeah. Have a look at it. So I think magus is not etymologically connected to image, but it would be for someone like Yeats. So I'm going to look at the sort of cluster of image imagination, and in some of the poems, with a view to think through the ways magic works as a poetics. Poetics of transformation and image making that recasts the lyric as dramatic, but is also still erotic, as in love lyric. But also as a shape-shifting trans-temporal event. And the talk will relate to A's sphere, the gods were merely images for Yeats, it was put in poetry by Tom. And it's also to maybe the processes whereby the rhetorical counter-pressures that Matt talked about, how they actually work as a sort of dramatization technique through personae. The images as kind of personae. And they're just thinking about the way those personae are worked up by Yeats as a play of hostile minds, but as a kind of built-in magical technique. Anyway, this is with thanks to Neil throughout. Just for the idea of magic, just start off with William Blake and imagination, and the ideas of good and evil, and just looking at, I'm not going to read all these out, there's a lot of slides, so that those of you who can skim read, do so willingly. But it's like, I think, if you say the last quote, if the spectator could enter into one of these images of Blake's imagination, approaching them on the fiery chariot of his contemplative thought, if he could make a friend and companion of one of these images of wonder, which always entreat him to leave mortal things, as he must know, then would he arise from the grave, then would he meet the Lord in the air, and then he would be happy. So I think the Blakean imagination is being thought through as a kind of fetishizing of the dead. The fact that Blake talked to the dead all the time, saw them, and more than their images, was very important to the way that kind of this rising from the dead happens, because you're talking to them. But the imagination is like this image making, image receiving power. So the images that the poet like Blake seems to be making are actually kind of receiving. Elsewhere, Blake representing the shapes of beauty haunting our moments of inspiration, they come from the people, Yeats says, who are older than the world. People that are older than the world. So this kind of, it's not only a fetishizing of the dead, but a supernaturalizing of the dead. So that the dead are the spectres, but also the daemons that we were talking about. But remember, they're supernaturalizing the dead as companion or companionate images. Right? So this is like defining magic as this image receiving power. And if you look at the talk that he gives in 1901 on magic, he defines magic as evocation of spirits, this power of creating magical illusions, and visions of truth in the depths of the mind when the eyes are closed. So the beautiful those three moods. So those three moods are related to the three doctrines, he says. One, shifting borders of mind, so many minds can flow into one another, revealing a single mind, a single energy. And this kind of multiplicity is worked into the idea of magic. And then one great memory, the memory of nature herself, that's the second doctrine. And the third doctrine, the fact that the great mind and this memory can be evoked by symbols. So that's the image receiving power. But then it's like the image, to turn an image into a symbol, that's when the poet becomes a little bit more agency, right? So you need the three doctrines to turn the images into symbols. So, but note those three definitions of magic, evocation of spirits, creating magical illusions, visions of truth, are equally aesthetic maneuvers. They're aesthetic maneuvers. So the three doctrines are kind of unifying and fetishizing of the magical operations of the imagination into spiritual mind and memory of a kind of totalizing otherness of nature. Right? And this turn on the magical imagination, though, this does have its dark side. It's potentially dangerous, potentially evil. Right? He's aware of that, Yeats. And it also creates a split in the maker between the person who really naively believes that those are real spirits and a kind of resistance to it as a modernist. And turning it more into an aesthetic maneuver. You have both at the same time. It happens because of the potential danger of the operations. The poet splits into two. One who believes and one who has his doubts, right? As I say, his talking about this. But the point of it all is to remake the world. Aesthetic doctrine is boosted, as you see, if you think about it as just an aesthetic one, it's boosted very much so to become a great Spinozan and Parmenidean, how do you say it? Parmenidean unity, right? So that's how ambitious this idea of magic is. But I'm going to read it as like, with aesthetic prejudices. So one of the things, where did this obsession with magic start with? And I think it was as a child. This is the boy, Brazilian boy with me, saying it all starts with boyhood. So in the reveries of a childhood and youth, he remembers his father terrifyingly teaching him how to read. My first clear image of him was fixed on my imagination. The image imagination is like fixed as a unity with this idea of a father. And then the image is given to us. He had a very black beard and hair, and one cheek bulged out with a fig that was there to draw the pain out of a bad tooth. His father, in order to teach him how to read, read poems to him, including the Lays of Ancient Rome and the Lay of the Last Minstrel. And the Lay of the Last Minstrel, Yeats remembers, gave me a wish to turn magician. That competed for years with the dream of being killed upon the seashore. Like, what? Anyway, but if you look at the Lay of the Last Minstrel, you have the figure of the wondrous Michael Scott, a wizard of such dreaded fame, that when in Salamanca's cave, he enlisted his magic wand to wave, the bells would ring in Notre Dame. So the origins of the superstition is earlier, this magic asceticism, is earlier than pagan asceticism. It goes right back to this enigmatic, dangerous father who is also an artist. Right? There's the father as the image maker, painter, is the magician that creates through a kind of this like death wish of being killed by his father, presumably, from seashore. He wants to become a magician as well. That kind of like wanting to be another person in order to be a magician becomes sort of theorized from the very start, and it sort of starts to explain why he needs to have personae in order to talk about magic often. The Robarts and Ahern writings, I think, are really important for that. But they are, I think, forms of the dramatization, which are really important for understanding his approach to this magic asceticism. So this father-son dyad, his dangerous father and the son magician, is replicated in this split self in Yeats himself, between the man of action and the man of contemplation, between somebody who naively believes in the power of art and magic, and one whose doubt has severe doubts. And then you get these two personae, Robarts and Ahern, the artist and the critic, the lyric poet and the man of the world. And it sort of generates this dialogic poetics, the dialogue of the mind with itself, which also speaks to the problem of his Anglo-Irish identity, which is also obviously split. So both being potentially a magician bard for the Irish and being critiqued as a West Brit by the Catholic Irish, that comes into the characterizations of Robarts and Ahern. Right, so you have a Catholic in there, you have somebody who leaves Ireland and travels the world, etc. The magic trick would be to recruit the Irish dead to the cause of nationalism. And what the Yeats Ahern, as you can see here, Robarts is a Blakean artist who believes the immortals enter into the dance of the mortals to generate possession in order to materialize the imagination. But Ahern is a kind of austere Paterian collector and critic, dabbling in art for art's sake. I'm simplifying, obviously, but they get muddied and cross over. We're just making a point. But it's an asceticism of the religious imagination of Ahern. So that this double act generates the theory of the antithetical self. And you can see that at work when you have Yeats as Robarts overtly talking to Ahern in Anglo-Irish conversation. And that turns into Robarts' Ahern dialogue in Phases of the Moon. And it's kind of Paterian kind of dialogue, that dynamic or essential dialogue of the mind itself. That's Pater. So if you're looking at the phases of the moon, these two old men, Ahern and Robarts, have been wandering the back roads of Ireland, very much like sort of Velen and Rambo, or as prefigurations of Beckett's trance. And they just happen upon through a baladi, by chance. And there's actually Yeats inside. What the hell's happening there? Isn't Yeats supposed to be robots? Or both? So there's three of them, okay? And there is Yeats with his Paterian bookishness, trying to be just a poet. Right? So there's this kind of this aesthetic thing that's happening. Finding what is like mere images, right? And he believes Robarts is dead. He may be right, but he's wrong because Robarts is outside. So Ahern asks Robarts to sing the phases of the moon, the full cycle of which has as its effect, all thought becomes an image, and the soul becomes a body. That body and that soul, too perfect at the full to lie in a cradle, too lonely for the traffic of the world. Body and soul cast out and cast away, beyond the visible world. So this kind of Beckettian pseudo couple are actually really close to Yeats's most passionate beliefs, right, as a poet, but they're split from him. And then this play of meaning of image, at the one extreme, it just means rhetorical gestures, mere images, and empty metaphors. But at the other, these images are condensation of mental processes into this visual art object, the symbol, that can accompany the embodiments of the soul. Right? So how can it be both at the same time? And it can only be true if you split into not two, but three. Right? You've got the writer, and then somebody who believes, and somebody who's just more of an aesthetic mode. Okay? Okay, right. Yeah. So just to finish off, the dreams that are generating the images are mostly erotic. They're eroticized, and they work off the body of the loved one. So you have three, you have four actually. It's the loved one as well is necessary for magical operations. As we see that the female figure, as somebody remarked yesterday, splits into two, doesn't she? So we're talking about 5 people that Yeats turns into to write his poems. So would you say the poems are always already dramatic, and they're dramatizations. And there's aesthetic operations. The image here, as is all thought, as a result of the transformation of rhetorical visual tropes into hieratic symbol, a visionary object or scene that accompanies this radical personae work of the poet. And these symbolical images are seductive. And they're seductive of the indifferent loved one in a kind of troubadour fashion. So what I'm saying is Yeats is keenly aware of how open he is to ridicule. And that's why those two personae outside Tuolari, they are mocking Yeats the whole time. They're mocking him all the time. So Ahern in particular mocks Yeats, the poet in this town, as an unwitting sufferer of the cycle without knowledge. So you've got, that's the thing. So it's like a triangular male image receiving magician and poet, and a double love object That's the magic.
Thank you very much, Alan. That was fascinating. I'm back to the phases of the full moon. Now it's going to be Alessandra Leonato who's speaking. He's a professor of English language and literature at Federal University of North Tocantins. Is that right? Tocantins? Yeah, in Brazil. He holds a doctorate in linguistics and literary studies in English from the University of São Paulo. And with the thesis, Humor in Times of Trouble. He's an administrative director of Brazilian Association of Irish Studies, and he's going to be talking on the dreaming of the bones, and in particular, daimons and ghosts.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. Not easy, Tocantins, as I shared with some of you, 2,000 kilometers. So I would like just to talk a little introduction about the idea of this project. It is in the very, very beginning. It's a project that I made 4 years ago and was on hold. So now I had a little time and decided to get back to it. And I started by the Dream of the Bones. So when I first read the Dreaming of the Bones, I was struck by the ghostly figures of the Virgella and Diana. In their liminal role, I space a historical judgment where they seek forgiveness. So it's history and forgiveness. Being denied afterwards by the one, and here I quote from the play, of their own race, the young man. Initially, my focus rested on these spectral characters. However, as I revisited the play while preparing for this conference, a subtle yet powerful presence emerged. A force that orchestrates the dancer's compulsive movements and play. That a force that guides the wandering young man animates the dreaming bones and drives the play itself. The invisible force, I argue here, is a dynamo. And this thought became central to my reading. So I'd like to just draft what I've done so far in this research. Although I do believe it was my own diamond, although I'm not a spiritualist person, I think a diamond whispered this aspect of the play to my ears when I was reading. I knew in my bones only this feeling in my guts would not be enough to support my argument here today. Aware of this, I put myself in researching on the differences of diamonds and ghosts. It was so funny because coming here, there is this, I think he's very famous in Minas Gerais. He told me he's a ghost hunter, and he has a car with horns and everything. But it was very funny. Aware of this, I put myself on researching the differences of diamonds and ghosts. Yet, a neophyte in Yeats' vision, as I told you yesterday, I just came across a vision 2 weeks ago. First I started from the Greeks, the idea of diamond from the Greeks. I was not aware of Yeats' diamonds. So I went back to the Greek philosophers, due to even Socrates himself had a habit of consulting his diamond, and we all know how he perished later for it. Yeats sets the play in the aftermath of the 1916's Rising, yet he also taps into a folk tradition reminiscent of the Ashley. And I was researching also on Owen Rula or Sullivan. There is this idea of the poems that actually, there's this tradition, right? These works often depict a poet wandering near a terminus or a fairy wrath, encountering an otherworldly woman who inspires him. They also mentioned the figure of Helen and the women, and also, of course, Eric, the Ireland. In the dreaming of the bones, the young man, a survivor of the rising, wanders the surroundings of the counting player, some unknown landscape. He's waiting for a boat to take him to the Iron Islands. In his words, describing his role here, right, and I quote from the play, I was in the post office, and if taking, I shall be put against a wall and shot. Instead asking the ghost, what about the whereabouts of the ghost that asks the young man in the this idea connects him politically to the executed poets and leaders of the rising, including Patrick Pierce, Thomas McDonagh, and Joseph Blanket. Although the text does not explicitly identify him as a poet, you just have the young man, either as a leader of the rising, one might speculate whether he represents a surviving member of that creative lineage. It's just a thought. The other two characters whose interaction with the young man reveals the couple's identity are figures from the past, from 700 years ago. Early on, however, the Didascalia provides a brief visual description of the couple. A man and a girl, both in costume of a pastime. They wear heroic masks. This description visually evokes the figure of Diarmuid and the Virgilla. Their masks function as more than physical disguise. They symbolize the dual nature of their existence as ghosts, projections or shadows of what remains of their former selves. The idea of spectral identity comes to my mind the image of Odysseus. When Odysseus descends into Hades in the Odyssey, where he must offer a sacrifice to summon Tiresias. This was the image that came to my mind. During his journey, he also encounters Achilles and his mother, both of whom lack memories of their past lives. They are but shadows, faint echoes of the individual they once were. So the idea of a ghost as a visual reminder of someone when you are in life, but you're not yourself anymore, you have another identity as a shade. In contrast with the space and clear aim of speaking to a ghost in Odyssey, the young man's encounter with the ghostly couple, the Virgil and Diarmuid, take place amid the ruins of Concordia Abbey. The setting is a liminal space where both the living and the dead wander. This encounter occurs in what is described as the hour before dawn and the moon covered up, a place inhabited by lost souls as depicted by the character, and I quote from the play. For certain days, the stones where he must lie have, in the hour before the break of day, been haunted. The haunted space is populated by an interesting crew that could be seen at any hour of the day, because the MS cannot see ghosts. And they answered that these ghosts you can see any time of the, even during the day. So, in some of these ghosts, besides the Gorgilla and Diarmuid, They are in a dream. And then I kept thinking about our lecture yesterday that ghosts are living in a dream, but not, they can never wake up. And some, for an old scruple, must hang spit upon the swinging tops of love trees. Some are consumed in fire, some withered up by hail and slipped out in the wintry north, and some but live through their whole lives again. Considering the characterization of a ghost from what we thought in Neil's keynote yesterday, ghosts always live in a dream, but in this dream, likewise the characters in Hades, in Homer, they have no memory, they have no name. And also in the play, they have no name. At first, young man, the stranger, and the girl. But in this dream, in Homer also the heroes die twice. First in the battle, after when their names are forgotten. So they remember after their names when talking to the young man, to a living person. Also in death, there is this double death. You die and you become a stranger. You are a stranger and then your memory of who you were alive. Moreover, a dream is distinguished from a vision, as we know that a vision comes true, connecting with this idea of the reference that he makes to the poet, to the poem. The atmosphere of the play is also one in betweenness, neither fully day nor entirely night. And the abbey, the village, and the path to the cemetery are all covered in darkness, a liminal moment before waking, when dreams take hold. The girl/wind that extinguishes the young man's lantern, allowing out she puts the fire out, so in the dark they could see each other. Another otherworldly connection with the spectral couple. In the darkness, the boundaries between the strange and the familiar dissolve. The young man in this darkness, he recognizes his vulnerability and his unfamiliar realm, saying, I should not be afraid in County Clare. County Clare is a familiar place in the west of Ireland, even in this sense of a place, a safe place for the resistance of the rising. On the other hand, is a haunted place. A safe place is a place full of ghosts. And the young man says, I should not be afraid when others come. I should not be afraid in Clare, and should not be, have no choice. I have to put myself into your hands, now that my candle's out. Although there is a clear reference to a historical time in the play, other temporalities inhabit the ruins of the abbey. This encounter of past and present brings a duality that is also inherent in other aspects of the play. There are two temporalities, the living and the dead, mask and actor, the dance they perform it twice. The young man was not searching for ghosts when he goes to the west of Ireland. On the other hand, the ghosts are waiting for someone to forgive them. What do we make of this accidental encounter? Let's take a look at some excerpts from Yeats' mythologies. So, quoting her Amicus Lenten in mythologies, I think that all religious men have believed that there is a hand, not ours, in the events of life. And that, as somebody says and Master, accident is destiny. So this accidental encounter, and both, although the couple, they are traitors. The young man, he's the one who is a rebel, he was fighting for Ireland. Even if their attitude, they have opposite attitudes uh, facing the history of Ireland. They share it's some similitude on their destiny, because the young men they cannot walk alone free, and the ghosts cannot stop dancing. They cannot be free to kiss each other. And so there is, even they are opposite, they share a destiny. Uh, Accident is destiny, and I think it was Heraclitus who said, "The diamond is our destiny." When I think of life as a struggle with the diamond, who would ever set us to the hardest work among those not impossible? I understand why there is a deep enmity between a man and his destiny, and why a man loves nothing but his destiny. In Yeats' conception, the diamond embodies a force that confronts the human self, driving individuals beyond the ordinary into a heightened state of being. The masks, therefore, symbolize this meeting of opposites, the human and the heroic, the temporal and the eternal, the living and the spectral. They allow the characters to transcend their historical roles as traitors to Ireland's sovereignty, becoming archetypes in a mythic, universal drama. Through the masks, the past converges with the present, blurring distinctions between reality and illusion, personal agency and fated action. This dynamic reflects Yeats' larger exploration of identity as a site of transformation, shaped by internal and external forces in constant tension. If a dialogue offers the idea of a sharing destiny, it is important to read the play remembering that both the ghost couple and the young man share different forms of imprisonment. The young man cannot walk freely during the daylight, the skip, as I said, and then so this accidental life of theirs brings their destiny when this human meets the ghost figures, the memories, and it binds him to their narrative of love, betrayal, and longing. In this bond is immediately created, as we can see in the stranger's words. So when they meet, the stranger says, "I will put you safe. No living man shall set eyes upon you. I will not answer for the dead." And I wonder if the diamond it's a materialization of a force. It happens in between the beings. So the relation created, what I call diamond here so far, is this relation between the dead couple and the young man. So the action, the force that brings them together, that puts them in relation. Just some notes on the etymological roots of diamond that I found interesting to analyze today. So to better understand this interplay of forces, it is helpful to revisit the Greek concept of diamond. So the term derives from the verbs such as daiso, that's so, to divide or share one's life or destiny, daio, to divide or ignite, and diomai, to divide or decompose. From this, the meanings, the field of meanings that these verbs represent, depending on the context, is being evolved into a concept that embodies generative and disruptive forces. I don't call here good and evil, but the idea of creation um, and disruptive. Um, Moving on. Philosophers such as Heraclitus, Parmenides, and Democritus use the term daimon to conceptualize a force inherent to both nature and humanity, a force capable of driving things toward good or evil. This is Heraclitus. In Heraclitus' fragment 128, he mentions man's ethos is his daimon. So the idea that we have a voice in our head, a conscience, or something that is responsible in a way for choices, it highlights the internal intrinsic nature of this force. From where I see Yeats' conception of the daimon, it diverges from this idea. On one hand, he's inspired by Heraclitus or challenged. But I think for me, from what I read so far, the daimon in Yeats manifests as an external force, distinct from the self, yet deeply connected. His duality is evident in his writings, particularly in Anima Omnis within mythologies. A strange living man may win for a daimon in a mistress area. But now I add another thought. The daimon comes not as like to like, but seeking his own opposite. And then I thought back about this tension between the young man and the ghost couple. They are opposite, although they share a path. At the, in the play, the path, really, the path to go to the abbey, the literal path. Um, I highlight here that Yeats named Diamond character as a stranger first. There is this idea of the everyman at first in this character, can be any man. And the girl is called home girl, the idea of representing any girl. They encapsulate the fate of a man and women as something eternal to use. The diamond comes sitting in its other, an ethic sense. If we can think about the attitude facing history, traitors or heroes. And then we return to the exam of the mask. This tension between man and mask, a recurrent theme in Yeats' work, suggests a fragmented self, one that seeks completion through its diamond. The dynamic forces in the play, and then I come to my conclusion, partial conclusion. In the dream of the bonds, the young man interacts with the ghostly couple in markedly different ways. The stranger readily offers help upon learning of his role in the rising, while the girl recounts their cursed existence, a life of eternal dance, haunted by their betrayal and forbidden from embracing one another. This curse and the compulsive dance evoked the duality of the diamond, a force that propels life, but also enforces its decay. The young man found the refusal to forgive accuse humanity's struggle, and refusal to forgive, leaving both the living and the dead suspended in their respective states of longing and estrangement. Yeats' complexion vision of the diamond as both creative and destructive force animates this haunting play, blurring the boundaries between history, myth, and the supernatural. It is the demonic energy that compels the young man, the ghosts, and ultimately the audience to confront this cyclical nature of guilt, memory, and the act of eternal asking for redemption. And I end just with the dance that goes twice, just reading this part. They passed the shell well in the flat stone, fooled by the drinking cattle, the narrow lane where mourners for 5 centuries have carried noble or peasant to his burial. And owl is crying out above their heads. Why should the heart take fright? What sets it beating so? The bitter sweetness of the night has made it but a lovely thing. Red bird of March begin to crown. Up with the neck and flap the wing, red hawk and crow. They go once round the stage, the first musician speaks. And now they have climbed through the long grassy field and past the ragged thorn trees and the gap in the ancient hedge and the tongue nestled owl. At the foot's level beats with a vague wing. Yes, the dance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Anton. Wonderful exploration of play. Now go for the magic of the internet rather than anything quite as exciting to Iowa, where Nick Serra will be talking. Dr. Serra is Professor of English at Upper Iowa University, where he's been teaching writing, literature, and religion for the last 26 years. He published studies of Yeats in journals as diverse as Religions, Estudios Irlandeses, Telema, and the Yeatsian Review, and contributed chapters to several scholarly volumes, including Ireland, War and Peace, Border Crossings, Narration, Nation, and Imagination in Scots of Irish Literature and Culture, and W. Yeats in the Vision, Explications, and Contexts. His primary critical methodology attempts to explain the effect that Yeats' occult beliefs had on his body of work, using documents from the Golden Dawn and a critical lens to retro-engineer what might be termed initiated readings, suggesting connections and elucidating the practical and esoteric functions of Yeats' symbolism that his fellow students would have recognized. And Nick's lecture is entitled Crazy Jane and Yeats' Failure as Magister Templi. Nick.
Thank you, Neil. Can you hear me?
Just
Not quite.
we're gonna make it louder.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. First, I'd like to thank the conference organizers because I could not have traveled this week for exams. And I will just start in. In his essay Magic, Yeats notes that esoteric symbols are of all kinds, for everything in heaven or earth has its association, momentous or trivial, in the great memory. And although it was long before he himself would admit an inherent power in symbols, by 1901 he thought them the greatest of all powers, whether used consciously by the masters of magic or half unconsciously by their successors, poets in particular. Yeats unarguably considered himself both simultaneously. Moreover, his primary matrix for understanding the powers and relationships of symbols was the Kabbalistic system of the Hermetic Order of the Golden Dawn that he had learned from MacGregor Mathers in the 1890s, and which he demonstrably utilized for the remainder of his life. Today, I would like to discuss the occult foundation of what Elizabeth Cullingford calls Yeats' lyric gender changes in the Crazy Jane poems. For reasons of time, I will focus solely on the appearance of Jane herself as symbol and hypothetical raison d'etre for symbol. For as the persona or ritual mask of a practicing occultist, she is a Janus-like figure, self-born, both method and result. In one pragmatic sense, Crazy Jane emerges from the same near-death illness that inspired dialogue of self and soul, and presents the philosophy of the self, projected onto a more dramatic, less abstract character. As a poetic mask, she shows a Yeats obsessed with the body, within a Western Christian mystical tradition in which the body and soul are antagonists, or at best non-coordinate. Body and soul, body and soul. Throughout his later metaphysical works, the phrase beats a tattoo like the drum taps in the resurrection. Without question, Jane is an appropriation of the female voice by a male poet, textually present or not. Again, I agree with Cullingford. Jane is the figure for an eroticized politics of female transgression. Eroticized by a 64-year-old man sick with desire for the salmon falls, the mackerel-crowded seas he had largely missed out on, and who would shortly say of a visit to a brothel, "It was terrible, like putting an oyster into a slot machine." Similarly, I concur with her evaluation that from a political perspective, Crazy Jane is a challenge to the cultural exclusions by which the Free State was attempting to assert its body boundary identity against the encroachments of modernism. Yet my reading sees that for Yeats, the Golden Dawn adept, adopting the voice of a female character is a deliberately ritual act, a method for calling the feminine into himself in a way that goes beyond metaphor. Read within the context of Yeats's Golden Dawn curriculum, the poems represent what is arguably the last of an extended series of documented magical initiations in which Yeats attempted to understand and align himself with the planetarily encoded aspects of the supernatural universe, both macro and microcosmically. More specifically, the appearance of Crazy Jane is, I would argue, a predictable function of Yeats' attempt at the Golden Dawn grade of Magister Templi, and an apprehension of the solved antinomies that didn't happen at the bottom of a grave. And then, assumption, escape, apotheosis, union with the absolute, nobody knew. To achieve this, he had only to come to a fundamental understanding of the universal feminine, invoke it, and take it into himself. And now things start getting technical. The Magister Templi grade was assigned to the Sephira Binah, the root of primordial feminine divinity on the Kabbalistic tree of life, which is what's on the screen. Binah is the top right sphere. In fact, you can see everything in the Golden Dawn was assigned a place in this glyph. Grades of initiation and the myths and symbol sets assigned to each, the parts of the human psyche and soul, as well as alchemical, planetary, zodiacal, and tarot symbolism and correspondences. Everything in creation. Where there is no thing, there is God. Proceeding out of nothingness or limitless light, the 10 spheres, worlds, numbers, or Sephiroth, and the 22 paths between map the progression of God emanating into matter. It is a schematic diagram of creation and a map of the soul's path back to God, a God's eye view of the universe and the paradigm of God in microcosm within the human organism. For Yeats' fellow students, each of the 10 Sephiroth represented a grade of initiation that entailed meditating on and invoking a specific grouping of symbols, forging a spiritual connection between a given aspect of the Anima Hominis and the corresponding element of the Anima Mundi, completing a certain stage of yoga, in effect. Thus, in the Theoricus grade, assigned to the moon and the Sephira Yesod, sort of the second one up on the middle pillar, one studies and invokes lunar symbols and divinities. In the Philopsis grade, Aphrodite, Venus, Nike, and all things venereal. In the all-important and central Adeptus Minor, all things solar, dying vegetation deities in particular. Some of the ritual practices were borrowed from the late Neoplatonists and Theurgists. Predictably, a few of the symbols that Yeats was working with at any given time bleed over into his poetic metaphors. For example, it does not surprise me that after he had meditated on the Jovian symbol sets included in the Adeptus Exemptus grade, the lyrical swans of Usheen and withering of the boughs magically transform into Leda-raping emblems of the soul and the concentration of the sky. But back to Binah as the divine feminine. Yeats was initiated into the Golden Dawn in March of 1890. In the following 32 years, he mastered the symbols and grades associated with 6 of the 7 classical planets. In 1893, he began working on the dying god symbolism, which is a reflection of the symbols of the Great Mother. I would note that since these last myths were written down within patriarchal societies, all have devouring overtones of inherent terror for men, or so say the Freudians. Symbolic fears of penetration, castration, and madness. In 1896, Yeats showcases an overt manifestation of Bernard during the initiation ceremony of Michael Robart's Order of the Alchemical Rose, which is obviously based on the Golden Dawn's Adeptus Minor ritual. She appears as an immortal August woman who had black lilies in her hair, and her dreamy gesture seemed laden with a wisdom more profound than the darkness that is between star and star, and with a love like the love that breathed upon the waters. These are all typical Kabbalistic tropes associated with Binah, the lilies especially, as symbols of purity and death, all things Saturnian and black, with a connection to the pre-creation waters of Genesis. Typically, a la Adonis, the male narrator mistakenly concludes that she is drinking up his soul. 4 months later, Yeats performed an invocation of the moon and received the so-called Archer vision. This is one of the very few times when he comes close to actually explaining himself in print. At least he details the general steps he took, the Kabbalistic names, etc., associated with the moon. He describes his vision and provides a Kabbalistic interpretation, symbolically linking the 3 levels of the Golden Dawn that you can see in the diagram, and the 3 parts of the Kabbalistic soul, the highest of which resided in Binah, which enfolds the 2 highest Sephiroth. This solar, lunar, masculine, feminine dichotomy and its resolution became the foundation for his later metaphysical work. In 1916, just prior to the Easter Rising, Yeats was initiated into the grade of Adeptus Exemptus, the highest level of the second or inner order. So this is the middle sphere on the right-hand side. The next grade, which he could attempt after mastering the Jovian symbol sets and curriculum of the 7-4, was Magister Templi, assigned to the Sephiroth Binah, the planet Saturn, the symbolic matrix that includes all of the pre-creation Dark Mother figures, fertile, receptive, and destructive. This next initiation also hypothetically elevated one to the 3rd order, the level of the Golden Dawn's secret chiefs, repositories of esoteric authority, who were never seen, but to whom were attributed fabulous abilities, and about whom there were conflicting accounts and many questions. In brief, were the 3 highest grades of the order's hierarchy attainable to a mortal being, and how? And did one have to die first? Nobody knew. Pardon me. According to Isra Regardi and others, later heads of the order claimed elevation to Magister Templi, including Dr. Felkin, who was Yeats' co-adept in the reconstituted Stella Matutina. However, George Yeats was careful to point out that these honors were merely titular, or at least of an entirely different nature. Certainly the Felkins never claimed any of the magical powers attributed to this grade. On the Tree of Life, as you can see, there is no direct path between the 4th and the 3rd Sephiroth, though as Yeats' Archer vision demonstrates, one is implied. The order had no rituals relating to an initiation of Binah during Yeats's active tenure. No instruction on how to get there. Yet the promise of the grade hung like a black fruit from the highest branches of the tree. Similar to Madame Blavatsky's Mahatmas, these adepts were the elite of the spiritual elite. And George Yeats told Virginia Moore that Yeats spent the majority of his adult life striving to pass through all Golden Dawn grades up through the highest. We can only assume that at some time between 1917, when he decided to get married, and December 1931, when he began vacillation, originally wisdom, he attempted what he understood as the required tasks, and, in his own estimation, ultimately failed. During his Adeptus Minor oath, Yeats swore to purify and exalt my spiritual nature, that I may at length attain to be more than human, and unite myself to my higher and divine genius. As he would later phrase it in Byzantium, I hail the superhuman. I call it death in life and life in death, and thereby unwind the winding path of Hades' bobbin bound in mummy cloth. The initiation of Bana represents the most extreme form of that union. Yeats' erstwhile colleague Aleister Crowley describes it as equivalent to the attainment of samadhi, in which the many and the one are united. All things are rushed together in a union of existence with non-existence. There is a union of the ego and the non-ego. Duality in any form is abolished: time, space, and causality. There are no adequate descriptors, since language itself is founded on duality. As Yeats' soul in dialogue phrases it, "When I think of that, my tongue's a stone." If I had to guess, I would say that Yeats' serious interest in the symbolism that produced Crazy Jane began after 1925. It is clear from the earliest of the Vision notebooks that Yeats assumed that George's automatic writing was linked to their mutual work in the order. His remarks at the close of A Vision 1937 clearly indicate that he expected something to happen beyond the conveyance of his history of the soul. He published the first draft in 1925, still bubbling with the after effects of marriage and magic and sex magic. But nothing happened. Unity had not been achieved, and unity of the soul in Bana was said to bring all sorts of wonderful rewards, including rendering you almost like a god walking on this earth. Yeats had not become a god on earth, and so concludes that he has misunderstood the revealed geometry of his system and begins revisions and meditation thereon that led to some of his most powerful poetry and Crazy Jane. Nevertheless, I remain ambivalent about the cycle on the whole. Brenda Webster's psychoanalytic study sees the Crazy Jane series as evidence that the poet had at last integrated earthiness with the self, worked through his fear of the feminine and what he perceived as the feminine weakness in himself that provoked his inherent sadism. I myself don't sense much integration. Rather, in terms of a poetic depiction and construct, Yeats' sadism clearly won out. Compared to the mythic structures within which he was working, Crazy Jane's is a curiously powerless voice. For all of her extravagant ranting beneath the blasted oak, she is no great-bladdered emmer. She has none of the innate power given to so many of Yeats' other women of the cottages, commanding supernatural entities and concealing hidden secrets. What remains is her scoff and lour and scolding, and the bishop. Years later, Jane finally tires of cursing him in Crazy Jane on the Mountain, stretches out in the dirt and cried tears down. Walter Houghton reads her as an essentially tragic and heroic figure. She is certainly an emotional presence from A Vision's 18th phase, amid the cold, if passionate intellectualism of Yeats's mature work. I want to close not with a conclusion, but with resonances. I imagine Yeats sometime between the founding of the Free State and his retirement from the Senate, in poor health, but still wondering how to get to the next grade with no direct path across the abyss of perception. Knowledge hangs self-suspended halfway across. I imagine Yeats reviewing all that he knew about the rites of Cybele and Attis, Venus and Adonis, the Dionysian Maenads, Demeter and the Eleusinian Mysteries, the whole of Fraser's Golden Bough. I imagine Yeats reading about samadhi, trying to understand intellectually what can only be expressed as he well knew in pale metaphors. However, it is the Greek St. Paul who asserts that the invisible things of God are clearly seen, being understood from the creation of the world through things that are made. Thus, the first step to understanding the divine via the intellect is through natural theology, analogs, metaphors, and correspondences. I imagine Yeats thinking first about the natural female, breasts, the fantastical bosom of Diana of Ephesus, many-breasted and attended by bees, but in the end just breasts. Women, all the women he had ever known or imagined paraded before him, as Synge infamously phrased it, a drift of females standing in their shifts. Leopold Bloom surreptitiously staring at Venus's Callipygian cleft. Yeats, the dirty old man, obsessing about vaginas. Indeed, I see that in his post-marriage poetry, he overtly invokes a number of symbols that have mythic vaginal overtones and secret sexual meanings for at least some initiates. The bees and stare's nest and vacillation are a key example. You'll have to take my word for it, there isn't time. Would he have borrowed a pair of George's knickers to wear beneath his trousers? The Dionysian revelers of the resurrection cross-dress. And the pneumatic Greek tells how in Alexandria some men imitate women and paint their lips vermilion that they may attain and worship a woman's self-abandonment, to say nothing of the symbolism of Omphale in the hero cult of Heracles. Jane is the mouthpiece of Yeats' poetic and magical image of himself, striving for an understanding of its opposite, of all things not impossible, the most difficult. She is in gender opposition to Yeats the man. She is in power opposition to Yeats as man and adept and creator, though clearly Yeats has no problem here. As Cullingford notes, the poems are inextricably double-voiced. Jane is Yeats' puppet, and the poet-philosopher places many of his own metaphysical axioms about the body into her mouth, including the glorified body on the day of judgment, as an answer to the otherwise perpetual virginity of the soul, a key concept in Yeats' late oeuvre. I am in complete accord with Elaine Child's observation that within Yeats' personal religious pantheon, as distinct from the Golden Dawns, women are either goddesses like Maud Gunn, elevated to the symbolic realm while simultaneously being manipulated by the poet, or they are allowed to be mediums, helpmates for the male magician. In the end, Yeats uses Jane for his own political and certainly magical ends. Nevertheless, as poeta, the Latin noun for poet that takes masculine adjectives to its otherwise fundamentally feminine declension, he does not vouchsafe her even as much power as Chaucer gave to the wife of Bath. Ultimately, she has no effect on the bishop. As she is made crazy, she has no effect on the power structures of her wider world. She is a woman reduced to a comment. She did have an effect on Yeats, though. He came to hate her. During the winter of 1931, he told George that he wanted to exorcise that slut, Crazy Jane. In his sacerdotal language, he becomes the bishop, and to that end begins writing a poem about the tree of life entitled Wisdom, Chokhmah in Hebrew, the second Sephirah, energy of the phallos in linear motion. This is the top right-hand pillar. In doing so, he attempts to walk over Jane, her body a part of his greater road. Wisdom, however, in the end became mere vacillation, whose central avatar is Attis, the self-castrated consort of Cybele. In 1934, a rather desperate Yeats underwent the Steinach procedure, a one-sided vasectomy that was intended to allow his semen to recirculate internally upon ejaculation, his vital male energy self-absorbed. One can wallow in the beautiful mystical prose and verse that he produced during this period. Nothing exists but a stream of souls, and these eternal archetypes combine into greater units as days and nights into months, months into years, and at last into the final unit that differs in nothing from that which they were at the beginning. Sometimes, though, when I read through one Crazy Jane poem or another, I consider Yeats' evident disappointment in the remarks that close A Vision 1937, his genuine puzzlement at his failure to attain the reward for all his toil, unity of symbol and everything else. Surely something would have come when I meditated under the Kabbalists, but nothing comes. I think of Crazy Jane and take comfort in what Yeats' own system teaches. Karma is a bitch. Thank you very much. I've lost your audio.
It concluded. I hope you can hear us.
Now I can hear you.
Are there any questions for the panel? Go on.
I have a question for Matt. I really got it. It's like, yeah, just wondering about, Yeats as a writer, but it's a genre, right?
I think best so it can be heard out well.
I was just wondering about Yeats as a writer persona and just, I suppose that places him within a much bigger kind of modernist constellation Pound, but also Solar, some like Kafka as well. I suppose I was just wondering how, I was trying to look just outside Yeats' own kind of body of work, and the fact that he's investing in with this, this kind of supernatural, magical element that you certainly can't say for some of those other writers. So I suppose, I just wonder how we kind of, if the magic is happening through, was it 5 people maybe that was? 2 women and 3 men. I suppose, why is that magical for him, or conjuring? Whereas for Pound it almost seems to be kind of scorn of that kind of 1890s-ish kind of indulgence.
Yeah, I think that if you link him into the modernist personae crowd, then perhaps one of the ways of thinking about it is that he wants to be a modernist writer as well, right? And that's one of the personae of the 3. So it might be that the criteria received in the magician is accompanied by a modernist poet. He's the one in town. But then potentially he has no beliefs apart from those of this particular kind of male modernist crowd. But then I would sort of resist that in the same way as he does, because Michael Williams is closer to being him than Pound or a Hearn. Do you see what I mean? And so he's closer to someone like HD, who's kind of summoning up supernatural images as a kind of psychological as well as a mystical practice, but conjoined into what HD would think as a really, really important job of being a poet. So it's kind of like, but it's I don't think it's aware of the hecklers, as Jeff Hill would say, including the heckling voice into the personae crowd means that you can communicate and be a modernist poet. You can also be these other identities. Yeah. So there's like personae only interesting if you can take them seriously, live them seriously, which I don't think Pound is, but HD is.
Sandra, Nick, do you want to address that? Okay. Any
I
other
want to address
questions?
that.
Yeah, Nick.
Well, I don't know. When I look at Yeats' magic and poetics together, I see it a little differently because I mix together that bit from Autobiographies where he talks about MacGregor Mathers presenting him with a symbol and the world falls away and he has a vision. And MacGregor Mathers tells him, I only had to think about it. I didn't even have to give you the symbol. All I had to do was think about it. And the bit from Symbolism and Painting, where he talks about symbols as talismans, such as the medieval doctors gave to their patients and bade them meditate on because they contain these things. That if he were using symbols right, it would be like the electric Kool-Aid acid test. You didn't have to know what the symbols are. They would just cause things to happen in you. So that's really my idea of his magical poetics.
Thank you very much. Any other questions? I've got one for Alessandra. I was wondering, question here of spirits of the question of remorse. We were talking yesterday about the idea of remorse and the search for forgiveness. how important, I mean, they've been suffering for 7 centuries, and waiting for forgiveness. And how do they enact remorse in their dance and in their being?
Actually, I wasn't quite convinced. They have an actual remorse. I think what they want is forgiveness, but I'm not sure how they regret of it, because they mentioned it was love. I was in love, and then I had to betray Ireland on the way. It seems like a second issue. So that's very interesting. And that comes to my question, why they cannot get forgiveness? My question is because the young man, he at first he doesn't know who they are. So they are telling, we need someone from our own race to forgive us. And then when he said, I was almost doing it. I was almost, it's like there is a force that made him not to do it when there is this revelation of their identities. So I'm not quite sure if there's truly a remorse. What do you think? Is there a remorse? Do you see?
Sure, I mean, I'm thinking about Nick's comment about karma. Maybe they are suffering from karmic sort of debt or something, and that because their sin has affected a whole nation, there's a size of karma that maybe is almost too much. I mean, Nick, do you have anything to talk about karma?
I think that would take an hour and a half.
Well, 1 minute if you can. 1 minute and a half.
I don't know. I'm confused about Yeats' ideas of karma, Neil, and you know it, because the question is, do you just get to going on and on and on and on? With the phases. That's phases of the moon. The poem seems to say you just keep going on over and over and over again. It doesn't align with the vision notebooks, and I never really have understood how to fill the gap.
So, thank you. Yes. Sorry.
My question is about the names, the young man and stranger, because at the house well, they have the same thing. They don't, Yeats doesn't even a name, a special name for them. So you tell us about it, but I want to know more. I want to understand why he chose this form of
Maybe the idea of archetype, they are representing an idea as well, a girl. And it's interesting because she is a girl to the stranger, but she's a wind. She's wind she's a nature force to the young man when she blows the candle and he thinks that was the wind. But they have their names afterwards, differently from the Hawkswell. So the idea of revelation, and I was thinking about yesterday about the idea of revelation, the idea of heaven, the dream in the word, in the revelation. There's a have, you have, and concept in this revelation. And also, Isabelle, I think this idea of blurring, dreams when you think, I dreamed about a person, it was this person, but also was someone else. So this idea of metaphor, idea of converging different identities as well. But one of these identities is nameless. Nameless is the other man. It's a human being. Yeah.
Adrian, yeah.
Thank you all for really interesting papers. One quick comment, possibly, I think it's really about Carl more about the no source for giving the bones in the sense that it's just got, in a way, it comes quite close to a particular notepad that has a similar situation, and one of the components of notepads is a sense in which a kind of, well, this is one understood by Fernandez and Japan and so on, there's a sense in which the Buddhist religion in Japan is kind of laid on top of the Shinto religion, which is all about kind of place and a different kind of exploration, and it doesn't really answer the question. Sorry, I was just a thought. Karma being a Buddhist concept, of course, there's deeper, well, older concepts in the Japanese sense that are also being played with. And I suppose the conflict of those two things, Yeats finds similar to the conflict of the kind of old curse and everything like the modern world. That's the modern world. There's kind of two layers. But my question is more about the kind of Greek daemon, which I was interested in, your comparisons with, or to evoke Heraclitus or Odysseus going, to Hades, and the way in which one interacts with the dead then. It's obviously, again, obsesses power because he puts it in the cantos, that book of verse is sort of translated or transfigured, I suppose, in the cantos. But I guess the question is, what kind of Greek daemon do you think he's playing? Because I think it's looking at the roots of the word, it's really interesting to do that. I'd love to hear more about what you thought about what the roots of the word might do, the kind of particular divisions and answers that are being suggested. The idea of having to speak to the dead seems to be part of what going there. You can't do much with them if they're dead already. You can't put the power, but some kind of sense in which I will not answer for the dead, the kind of the dead must answer for themselves. And that seems to be related to an idea that a daemon might be trying to do, but somebody you might speak to, you can't necessarily affect the actions of when you speak to them. So I'm interested in what you thought about that Greek kind of, if you like, quite Heraclitus mainstream, the places which are two sort of mainstream Greek idea of the daemon and how that affects Yeats' daemon.
Actually, the Greek part came from my repertoire. I thought about the idea of having knowledge, because when Odysseus seeks for Tiresias, yes, it's Greek, Portuguese, or Tiresias, he wants to get the way, how he gets back to Ithaca, right? He needs a special knowledge on the way, guidance that only Tiresias can give him. And in this sentence, in the play, the young man is not actually needing. He doesn't need guidance because he thinks County Clare is a familiar place. So he says, but the English, they cut the trees, so now here, because in the past, people would hide safely in County Clare. So he's lost, he needs to wait for the boat, so he also needs knowledge on the way to escape. But he doesn't ask the boat differently from the Odyssey. He doesn't think that the ghosts have the knowledge he needs. On the contrary, the ghosts are the ones who need him, right? So I'm not sure if there is an influence, but I thought about this force between the relation, a living establishes with a death, with a ghost. to get some knowledge, in order to get something. And it's interesting because in heroes, it's differently, it's inverted, this idea. I'm not sure if there is a relation there, but I was thinking about this, thinking about ghost encounters. Maybe people encounter ghosts, what do they want? But, let's see, I'm not sure, I don't think I answered. But we can go on, the questions are more interesting than the answer.
Thank you very much.
Well, only to say that I think I forgot the name of the Japanese place. I remember the no play for it. Some of that scenario comes from the no play, in which there are two lovers who need not in quite the same circumstance, so need the shite, the traveller, to kind of come and solve their endless being apart, to do with fire and everything. I forgot the name of the play. It's some of the situation, some of the reversal that we're talking about, how they come from a different source. But yeah, I agree that it's the talking to the dead and finding something from them that seems to be crucial. In some way, I think that makes him kind of not so obviously a poet or a mage, because as you say, he's not searching for that. He's actually not kind of always trying to live. You know, in some ways, that makes him very kind of like a stumbler upon ideas, as opposed to the mage we were talking about, presumably having to deliver it. That's kind of the point.
I think we are reaching a point of sort of completeness and fullness. So thank you very much to all of our speakers for this fascinating talks. I think all of them actually provoke so much thought and so much that we'll all be thinking about later, and we'll be able to ask, hopefully, in a more one-to-one way at a later date. Nick, I hope that your cold gets better.
You made it through without coughing.
It didn't come across. It was very clear. It was very, very clear. So thank you so much. Can I give a hand, please, to our speakers.
Sorry, I wasn't,
Okay.
I wasn't saying clicking through my slides.
I don't know. Most of them are okay.